Hey guys, this is Tim and James with Tabletop Terrors, and today we're going to talk about tone. Specifically, tone in the respect of probably running and coming up with encounters and games for your players to play, but in the same respect, maybe a little bit as players, trying to get the right feel when playing a game.
So, this is a big one, because I think it's a missing step that isn't, I think, commonly realized is a missing step.
Exactly.
And what really got me thinking about this is that Matt Click actually sent me the link to, it's a YouTube channel called No Clip, short story. It is a video game documentary channel that is crowdfunded so you can get the real story behind video games. And they just did a 3-video series on the most recent Doom, 2016 Doom. And I love Doom. I've been a fan of Doom for a long time, so this game just hit it on every level for me. But hearing the developers talk, one of the major things that they said was they kept using the word feel. Mm-hmm. And I think, even as game developers, if you write adventures, modules, if you want to be an RPG publisher in any form or respect, you need to start learning this language. You need to start thinking like this, because what is the feel you're going for? And that's kind of like the mission statement. And what they talk about is, when they were designing combat, they decided, okay, we're not going to say what mechanics, what buttons do you push. No, what do we want combat to feel like?
Exactly. And I think I have not seen this documentary, but
for shame,
we've talked about the fact that they were a long time ago working on a game they were calling Doom 4.
Right.
And people played it. I mean, it got at least into alpha, but I think there might have even been a little bit of a beta where people played it and they really didn't like it.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, they didn't like it because it didn't feel right.
Exactly. They were calling it Call of Doom.
Yeah.
Because it was a military first-person shooter. The tone was just not Doom. It was not
just
Doom.
Happened to have demons in it. I didn't play it, nor have I really seen anything about it, but I've read that and heard that in interviews and stuff a lot.
And that's why I love this video series, because I think that in mainstream media, like, as far as video game journalism, it was almost like that was buried. Like, people just didn't talk about that.
Exactly.
So to hear the developers talk, and I mean, this game was far into development.
Yes.
They show footage, and it's like you said, it just didn't feel right. It looks gorgeous. The gameplay looks really cool. It's just not Doom.
And so to piggyback on the fact that this is an often overlooked step, I think that it's not overlooked or sometimes underused, even if people realize it. I was thinking of a good example that I think is a good example of this in Hollywood. I think that the Hobbit trilogy had some problems with feel.
That's a great way.
I feel like
that's a good point.
Now, for whatever reason, I mean, thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of people work on movies. So I think that it's a little easier in senses like that to get a little off track, for things to go wrong. But I feel like there are certain parts of the Hobbit films where I'm like, oh, that doesn't really fit the tone, or that's a little bit weird where it is. Or
sure.
And that's my opinion, but I feel like that is a good example for, hey, this isn't just happening to you or people that write role-playing games. This happens all the time in real life.
Right, and we're not going to go into a diatribe about how to fix the Hobbit movies and whether you love them or hate them.
Well, I mean,
I'm glad they exist.
Yeah, I'm glad they exist.
But exactly what he's saying, so it's like,
it doesn't completely ruin something, basically.
No. But if you're stuck trying to make an encounter, you're trying to make an adventure, you're trying to write a campaign, this is step one. Now, I just did a stream with Chris Wilhelm of Drop Dice talking about Session 0, where this is an entirely separate thing, where you talk amongst the people you're going to be playing with and say, okay, what's the social contract we're going to agree to? Let's set expectations and decide on feel and tone. So this comes after that.
Yeah, you should decide specifically with your players what they're looking for.
Right. Like the example, and I have the document pulled up so you can understand. I want to run a horror mystery using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I would like to explore the idea of self-sacrifice in the Dragongrin setting. That's your Session 0 high concept. I'm not saying you need to figure that out every game, but having that in place, I go, all right, what's the feel I want to go for in this encounter?
Exactly.
And then start there. Just say, okay, what do I want? Do I want it to feel like an action movie? Do I want it to feel like a war movie? Do I want it to feel like a thriller? Because all that matters when you start deciding where to place the pieces.
In my mind, something like that, or in general, the idea of feel is the sort of thing that you should have on a second screen or maybe on a Post-it note that you keep looking up at every time, like while you're planning your campaign or writing something.
Right.
Because it's just something that you should constantly think of. You think that at first, okay, you know, like you said, that's the pitch at the beginning. Then, when you're coming up, you're like, okay, so I want them to fight some zombies. We can make that feel like an action movie.
Sure.
We can make that feel like a thriller. We can make that feel like a mystery. So, what's your feel? Okay, well, my feel I'm going for is sort of mystery, survival, horror. So, I'm going to take that tone and put it all over my encounter that I'm writing right now.
Right.
And if you just keep doing that, get into that habit, everything I think will feel a little more cohesive, and you will it's less likely that you will walk away from a game thinking, how did that get away from me?
Right. And so this also bleeds into mechanics, you know. I see a new mechanic that someone came up with for, like, you know, climbing up the backs of creatures and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. But you got to think, before you throw it into an encounter, before you throw it into a game, what's it going to feel like when you're using it? If you're going for that action pace, you're trying to run something that's pretty lean, something that moves like this, stopping to figure out what quadrant of the creature you're standing on to adjudicate those quick rules, even if they're lean, is going to feel differently than if you just totally go with, nah, we're going to just do narrative combat.
Yeah.
What feel are you going for? Because we've been talking a lot lately about some advice that Matt Click gave me about campaigns, which is put the pieces on the board that you want to use and then slowly move them.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to realize that this is just how I need to start doing anything related to D&D.
And I would even take it a step further. Just about anything you're writing. Mm-hmm. I mean, a little less for maybe a dissertation on, I don't know, something crazy.
On the ingredients, the carbonated taurine sodium citrate caffeine benzocalicus.
But even still, if you're going for a more of a style where you're condemning the use of it in energy drinks, you need to keep that in mind when you're writing it. I would say just about anything. If you're writing a speech, if you're coming up with anything, keep that in mind.
Right.
But I think that it's especially pertinent because we're constantly coming up with stuff that other people are experiencing as people that play role-playing games.
Right. So, when you place your pieces to make an encounter, because I think people are asking, well, hey, do you have a cool encounter? All right, well, what is the tone and the feel? That helps me decide what pieces I'm going to place on the board and make you...
Ready?
I'm ready.
I like that people know that we come up with a bunch of analogies for the same thing.
Hit me.
Literally the tone. So, if you're talking a guitar, you're like, all right, these are the notes. I'm in the scale of G. You know, a major scale, these are the pieces overall. But I'm like, all right, but so even though it's a major scale... we're gonna, I want it to be grungy. So I'm like, I'm gonna hit the grunge pedal.
I love it.
But you're like, no, okay, I want this to be clean chorus effect. All right, bam. It's literally the same song with a different effect. It's the same encounter, the same pieces, the same villain, the same bad guys, the same conflict. But you're like, no, there's an air of mystery over it. Or, nah, they're Bruce Willis from the Die Hard films.
That's my jams, though.
Bruce
Willis is my jams, though.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that I want to give you some practical application here. Because, like I said, you're probably either coming up with an encounter or an adventure. Make this your mission statement. And use the same thing that Chris wrote for the session 0. I want to run blank using blank. And I would like it to feel blank. So, I want to run a combat encounter using zombies. And I would like it to feel like a thriller.
Exactly.
Totally different. But if you have to pinpoint yourself and say, I want to run blank.
Yeah.
Using blank, and I want it to feel like blank, that immediately makes you, okay, what pieces do I need to place? That's way different than if I say, I want to run a role-play encounter using a corrupt noble, and I want it to feel like...
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. It's like, okay.
Because that evokes so much, but again, to me...
It gives you a target to hit.
Exactly.
Most people are like, they're doing this, and they're like...
And I would say...
I never hit my mark, and it's like, you didn't decide on a mark.
Exactly. Even beyond the writing phase, when you're running the game, and I'll talk about players as well, when you're running the game or when you're playing in a game, when you're running the game, you're more likely to have come up with the concept. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, like I said, for me, it's good to have just on a window or write it down on a sticky note or something somewhere so I can keep seeing, like, oh yeah, make sure this is the tone.
The mission statement.
So even when I'm coming up with a description, because a player looked at something, I didn't necessarily write this, I'm like, okay, mystery. So I describe it that way, or the way this person talks. And in the same respect as a player, if you guys decided in a session 0 that you want this to be a mystery game and everything's kind of mysterious, it would be really out of character if in your roleplay moment you talked about how your character went to clown college.
Right.
It would just be, that's fine if you want your character to go to clown college, but just keep that tone in mind that you're trying to sort of, you want consistency in that. So it's a little less important for players, but it is still something that I'm doing my best to instill, that you should be thinking of it all the time.
Right, it's your social contract. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
whether you're playing or running or writing anything.
So how do you use this? How do you use tone and feel to make encounters, to make adventures, to stay on track, to make sure that it all fits together? Comment below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We're putting out all kinds of content of all different kinds, but we'd love for you to be a part, and just comment below and be a part of the conversation. So until next time, may your dice roll high.